"Ma'am, you're under arrest for being a spy." The handcuffs clicked shut around Sarah's wrists as she stood quietly in her small office, surrounded by computer screens and security cameras. She didn't fight back. She didn't argue. She just looked at the two soldiers and nodded calmly. The military police had no idea they'd just caught the most dangerous woman alive. They also had no idea what her tattoos would soon reveal, or how those tattoos would change everything they thought they knew about national security. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. Sarah Martinez had worked as a security manager at TechCore Industries for exactly 3 years, 2 months and 16 days. Not that anyone was counting, but Sarah always kept track of time. It was a habit from her previous life, though her co-workers would never guess that. To them, she was just another office worker who happened to be really good at her job. TechCore was one of those massive technology companies with glass buildings and fancy coffee machines in every break room. They made computer software for banks and hospitals, the kind of boring but important stuff that kept the world running. Sarah's job was to make sure nobody stole their secrets or broke into their buildings. She watched security cameras, wrote reports about suspicious activities, and coordinated with their offices in 15 different countries. Her office was on the 14th floor, with a view of downtown Dallas through floor-to-ceiling windows. She had 2 computer monitors, a stack of incident reports, and a small cactus plant that somehow managed to stay alive despite her busy schedule. On her desk sat a framed photo of her with the TechCore security team at last year's Christmas party, everyone smiling and wearing ugly sweaters. Sarah was 35 years old, 5 feet 6 inches tall, with long black hair that she always wore pulled back in a neat ponytail during work hours. She had dark brown eyes and a small scar above her left eyebrow that she claimed came from falling off her bike as a kid. She drove a silver Honda Civic, lived in a 1-bedroom apartment 15 minutes from the office, and had never been married. Her co-workers knew her as the woman who always brought donuts on Fridays, never missed a deadline, and somehow managed to remember everyone's birthday. What they didn't know was that Sarah Martinez didn't exist before 3 years ago. That Tuesday started like every other day. Sarah arrived at the office at exactly 7:45 a.m., stopped by the break room to make coffee, and settled at her desk to review the previous night's security footage. Someone had tried to break into Building C around 2:30 a.m., but the motion sensors had scared them off before they got past the parking lot. Probably just teenagers looking for expensive computers to steal. She was wearing her usual work outfit, a dark blue blazer over a white blouse, black pants and comfortable flats that let her walk quickly through the office hallways. Her company ID badge hung from a retractable cord clipped to her lapel, showing her photo and the words, S. Martinez Security Level 3. She'd earned that Level 3 clearance after 2 years of perfect performance reviews and 0 security incidents on her watch. At 2:17 p.m., Sarah was typing an email to their London office about updating their visitor badge system when she heard footsteps in the hallway outside her office. Heavy footsteps. Military footsteps. She recognized the sound immediately, though she couldn't explain how or why to anyone who might ask. Sergeant Rodriguez appeared in her doorway first, followed by Private Johnson. Both men wore dress uniforms and serious expressions that meant business. Sarah looked up from her computer and smiled politely, the same professional smile she gave to all visitors. "Good afternoon. Can I help you, gentlemen?" Rodriguez stepped into the office and looked around, taking in the security monitors and the neat stacks of paperwork. His eyes lingered on the framed certificates on her wall, completion awards from various corporate security training programs. "Are you Sarah Martinez?" he asked, checking a folded paper in his hand. "That's me. Is there some kind of security issue I can help with?" "Ma'am, you need to come with us." Sarah's fingers paused over her keyboard. Something in Rodriguez's tone told her this wasn't a consultation. "Am I in some kind of trouble?" "We'll explain everything at the base. Please gather your personal items." Sarah looked at the two soldiers, then at her computer screen where her unfinished email waited. She could see her reflection in the monitor, a perfectly ordinary corporate security manager having a perfectly ordinary day until 2 minutes ago. "Should I inform my supervisor where I'm going?" she asked, already knowing the answer but needing to maintain her cover story until the last possible moment. "That won't be necessary," Johnson said from the doorway. "Please come quietly." Sarah saved her work, closed her laptop and picked up her purse from the bottom desk drawer. She moved deliberately and calmly, like someone who dealt with unexpected situations every day in her professional capacity. Her hands didn't shake as she turned off her desk lamp and straightened her chair. Through the glass walls of her office, she could see her co-workers pretending not to stare. Janet from accounting had stopped typing and was trying to look busy while watching. Mike from IT support had turned his chair to get a better view. Sarah caught his eye and gave him a small wave, as if she was just leaving for an appointment. The walk through the office felt like it took forever. Sarah's heels clicked on the polished floor as she moved between cubicles and conference rooms filled with people she'd worked alongside for 3 years. People who knew her favorite coffee order, who'd invited her to birthday parties and retirement celebrations, who thought they knew exactly who she was. In the elevator, Rodriguez and Johnson stood on either side of her, their presence filling the small space. Sarah watched the floor numbers count down 14, 13, 12, 11, and wondered if she'd ever see this building again. "Ma'am," Rodriguez said as they reached the ground floor, "I need to inform you that you're under arrest for espionage." The handcuffs were already in his hands. Sarah held out her wrists without being asked, a gesture that made both soldiers exchange glances. Most people fought the handcuffs or at least argued about them. Sarah just stood there quietly while Rodriguez secured them, then followed him to their vehicle parked outside the building's main entrance. The military SUV was black with tinted windows and government plates. Sarah had seen similar vehicles around the city but had never expected to be riding in one. The interior smelled like leather and coffee, with a laptop computer mounted between the front seats and a radio that occasionally crackled with coded communications. As they drove away from TechCore's shining glass towers, Sarah watched her normal life disappear in the side mirror. The building grew smaller and smaller until it was just another structure in the Dallas skyline, indistinguishable from dozens of others. "Can I ask what specific charges I'm facing?" Sarah said after they'd been driving for 10 minutes. "Intelligence intercepts," Rodriguez replied from the driver's seat. "Communications with foreign nationals that triggered national security protocols." Sarah almost laughed. "I communicate with our overseas security teams every day. TechCore has offices in London, Tokyo, Sydney, Berlin, and 11 other cities. Coordinating international security policies is literally my job description." "That's what our investigation will determine," Johnson said from the passenger seat, but he didn't sound entirely convinced. The drive to Fort Davidson took 47 minutes through afternoon traffic. Sarah watched the city give way to suburbs, then farmland, then the imposing stone walls and razor wire that surrounded the military installation. Guard towers stood at regular intervals, manned by soldiers with rifles who checked every vehicle entering the base. At the main gate, Rodriguez showed his identification and spoke briefly with the guard. Sarah could hear fragments of their conversation through the open window. "Detainee transport, Building 7, Colonel Sterling expects her by 1600 hours." The guard looked at Sarah through the SUV's windows, his expression unreadable behind dark sunglasses. Fort Davidson was bigger than Sarah had expected. They drove past rows of identical barracks buildings, training facilities with obstacle courses, and parking lots filled with military vehicles. Soldiers in camouflage uniforms moved between buildings with purposeful efficiency, some carrying weapons, others pushing wheeled carts loaded with supplies. The processing center was a low, concrete building with no windows and a single metal door marked, "Authorized personnel only." Inside, the hallways were painted institutional green and lit by harsh fluorescent lights that made everyone look slightly sick. The floors were polished linoleum that squeaked under their feet as they walked. Staff Sergeant Williams ran the intake desk like a man who'd processed thousands of detainees over the years. He was in his late 30s, with graying hair and the kind of tired eyes that came from seeing too much bureaucracy. His desk was covered with stacks of forms, manila folders, and a computer terminal that looked like it belonged in a museum. "Full name?" Williams asked, his fingers poised over an ancient keyboard. "Sarah Elena Martinez." Date of birth? March 15, 1989. Current address? Apartment 4B, 1247 Elm Street, Dallas, Texas 75201. Williams continued through the standard questions with mechanical efficiency. Sarah provided her employee ID number, her supervisor's contact information, her security clearance level within TechCore, and a detailed explanation of her job responsibilities. She offered to help clarify any international communications that might have been misinterpreted, speaking with the patient cooperation of someone who believed the situation would be resolved once the confusion was cleared up. "Any medical conditions we should know about?" Williams asked. "None. Medications. Daily multivitamin. That's it." "Any tattoos, scars, or distinguishing marks?" For the first time since her arrest, Sarah hesitated. The pause was subtle, maybe 2 seconds longer than normal, but Williams noticed. Heat processed enough suspects to recognize when someone was calculating their response instead of simply remembering. "A few tattoos," Sarah said quietly, her professional confidence wavering for the first time. "I'll need to document them for your file," Williams explained, gesturing toward an adjacent examination room. "Standard procedure for all detainees. Photos and measurements." The examination room was even more sterile than the intake area. Bright white walls, a metal examination table, and medical equipment that looked like it belonged in a hospital. Medical technician Davis, a young man in army fatigues, prepared to take Sarah's vital signs while Williams set up his camera equipment. "Please remove your blazer and blouse," Williams instructed. "Keep your undergarments on." Sarah unbuttoned her blazer slowly, hanging it carefully on a metal chair. Her white blouse followed, revealing a simple white tank top that emphasized how ordinary she looked. Davis wrapped a blood pressure cuff around her arm while Williams prepared his documentation forms. "Blood pressure normal," Davis reported. "Heart rate slightly elevated, but that's expected given the circumstances." "Roll up your left sleeve please," Williams said, camera ready. Sarah's left forearm bore what appeared to be a compass rose design, about 3 inches in diameter. The tattoo was professionally done, with intricate details and shading that suggested both significant cost and personal meaning. Williams photographed it from multiple angles, making notes about its size and location. "This represents something specific?" he asked. "Navigation," Sarah replied simply. "Finding your way when you're lost." "Military related?" "You could say that." Williams moved to her right arm. "Other sleeve please." The right forearm revealed a more elaborate design, an eagle perched on a shield, surrounded by 13 stars. The artwork was exceptional, with individual feathers visible on the eagle's wings and detailed engravings on the shield's surface. Again, this was clearly expensive work done by a master tattoo artist. "This one's definitely military," Williams observed, taking his photographs. "Something like that," Sarah agreed, but her voice was growing quieter with each question. "Turn around please. Need to check your back and shoulders for any other marks." Sarah stood up from the examination table, her movements suddenly careful and deliberate. She turned to face the wall and slowly lifted her tank top, exposing her back from the shoulders to just below her bra line. Williams dropped his camera. On Sarah's back were 2 massive tattoos that absolutely did not belong on a corporate security manager, regardless of any military background she might claim. These weren't decorative pieces or personal expressions, they were professional military insignia of the highest order, the kind that unauthorized personnel would never be allowed to carry. The left shoulder blade displayed a coiled serpent wrapped around a dagger, its blade dripping stylized blood drops. The snake's scales were individually detailed, and its eyes seemed to stare directly at the viewer with hypnotic intensity. Surrounding the central image was text in Arabic script, integrated into the design with professional precision. The entire tattoo covered most of her left shoulder blade and had clearly required dozens of hours to complete. The right shoulder blade bore an even more striking image, a massive black eagle with outstretched wings, each feather rendered in photorealistic detail. The eagle's talons clutched 2 lightning bolts, and its eyes held the same hypnotic quality as the serpent on the opposite side. Beneath the eagle, in stark military-style numerals, were the numbers 242, surrounded by a circle of small 5-pointed stars. Both tattoos were masterpieces of the art form, clearly the work of someone with both extraordinary skill and access to classified military imagery. The level of detail, the quality of the shading, and the precision of the symbolic elements suggested not just significant financial investment, but deep personal and professional meaning. "Jesus Christ," Williams whispered, stepping backward as if Sarah had suddenly become radioactive. Davis stopped what he was doing and stared, his medical equipment forgotten. What are those?" Williams didn't answer. His hands were shaking as he reached for his secure phone, his mind racing through the implications of what he was seeing. These weren't random military tattoos or service commemorations. These were unit insignia for organizations that officially didn't exist. Sarah slowly lowered her tank top and turned around. Her expression remained calm, but something had changed in her eyes. The depth was still there, but now there was also a resignation, as if a long-anticipated moment had finally arrived. "I suppose my office job is over," she said softly, and Williams realized they weren't dealing with a simple case of corporate espionage. Williams ran from the room, leaving Sarah alone with the confused medical technician. She sat back down on the examination table and waited, knowing that everything was about to change. In the hallway outside, Williams was frantically dialing numbers on his secure phone. "Sir, this is Sergeant Williams at processing. We have a situation with the corporate espionage suspect. Her tattoos. I think we've made a serious mistake. A very serious mistake." The response on the other end was immediate and intense. Code words were exchanged, clearance levels verified, and within minutes, alerts were being sent up the chain of command. Someone with those particular tattoos shouldn't exist, and if they did exist, they definitely shouldn't be in military custody without proper authorization from the highest levels of government. 28 minutes later, Colonel Marcus Sterling's staff car pulled up outside the processing center, its tires squealing on the pavement. Sterling had been in a budget meeting when the call came through, and he'd left so quickly that he was still carrying the quarterly expense reports in his hand. Colonel Sterling was 48 years old and had spent 26 years in the United States Army. He'd served in Afghanistan, Iraq, and several other places that weren't officially acknowledged. He held security clearances that most generals didn't have, and he'd worked with special operations units throughout his career. If anyone was qualified to identify classified military insignia, it was Marcus Sterling. When Williams showed him the photographs on his computer screen, Sterling's face went completely white. He sat down heavily in Williams' chair and stared at the images for a full minute without speaking. The serpent and dagger with Arabic script was the official symbol of Task Force Viper, a black operations unit so classified that its very existence was compartmentalized beyond top-secret clearance. Sterling had heard rumors of Viper during his time with Special Operations Command, but he'd never seen official confirmation that the unit existed. The eagle with lightning bolts and the number 242 was even more restricted. It represented Operation Lightning Strike, a mission so sensitive that Sterling had only heard whispers about it in the most secure briefing rooms at the Pentagon. Whatever Lightning Strike involved, it was the kind of operation that required presidential authorization and congressional oversight. "Where is she now?" Sterling demanded, his voice carrying an authority that made everyone in the room stand straighter. Williams led him through the corridors to the holding area where Sarah sat quietly on a metal bench. She put her blouse and blazer back on and looked once again like a perfectly ordinary corporate security manager who'd gotten caught up in a bureaucratic misunderstanding. But when Sterling walked into the room, Sarah looked up and he saw something in her eyes that made his blood run cold. It wasn't fear or confusion, it was recognition. The look of one professional soldier acknowledging another. "Ms. Martinez," Sterling said carefully, using her corporate identity while studying her face for any sign of deception. "I think we need to have a very different conversation than the one you've been having." Sarah nodded slowly as if she'd been waiting for this moment for years. "I was wondering when someone would recognize the artwork." "Those symbols," Sterling began then stopped. "Even discussing these units in an unsecured room could compromise ongoing operations. They represent service in organizations that most people would say don't exist." "I was never officially anywhere," Sarah replied, and her voice carried a different quality now, still quiet, but with an underlying steel that suggested capabilities far beyond corporate security work. "My service record, if you bother to look it up, shows 8 years as regular military police. Nothing unusual. No special assignments. No classified deployments." Sterling understood immediately. Sarah Martinez, corporate security manager, existed in every database and official record. Her employment history, her apartment lease, her credit report, her medical records, all of it was real and legitimate. But the woman sitting in front of him, the one whose tattoos told a completely different story, had been erased from official military records so thoroughly that accessing her true file would require authorization from the president himself. "The espionage charges," Sterling said. "Your international communications with TechCorps' overseas offices. All legitimate business correspondence. Every single email, phone call and video conference," Sarah confirmed. "I've been doing exactly what my job description says for 3 years. Coordinating security policies with our international facilities, managing vendor relationships with overseas suppliers, and ensuring compliance with local regulations in 15 different countries." Sterling felt a chill run down his spine. They were looking at either the most incredible coincidence in intelligence history, or something much more dangerous. Someone with Sarah's background wouldn't end up in a routine corporate job by accident, and her arrest couldn't be the result of random surveillance either. "Who else knows about your real background?" Sterling asked. "The people who arranged my transition to civilian life," Sarah said carefully. "A very small group of individuals with the highest possible security clearances. My employment at TechCorps was part of a comprehensive cover identity, but it was intended to be permanent." Sterling understood the implications immediately. Sarah had been given a new life after completing operations so classified that her continued existence had become a liability to national security. The corporate security job wasn't just employment, it was witness protection for someone who knew too much about things that had never officially happened. Your arrest may not have been coincidental, Sterling said, voicing the suspicion that was growing stronger by the minute. Someone may have deliberately triggered the surveillance flags that led to your detention. Sarah's expression didn't change, but Sterling saw a flicker of something in her eyes, not surprise but confirmation of her own suspicions. If that's true, she said quietly, then someone with access to very high-level intelligence systems knows exactly who I really am. And they know that bringing me here would eventually lead to this conversation. The implications hit Sterling like a physical blow. If Sarah's cover had been deliberately blown, it could mean that classified operations involving Task Force Viper and Operation Lightning Strike were also compromised. This wasn't just a case of mistaken identity, this was potentially a massive breach of the most sensitive military operations in recent history. I need to make some calls, Sterling said, already reaching for his secure phone. Until we understand how this happened and who might be behind it, you're in protective custody. Colonel, Sarah said, stopping him as he headed for the door. Before you make those calls, you should consider that if someone went to this much trouble to get me here, they probably have a very specific reason. Sterling turned back to face her. What kind of reason? The kind that requires someone with my particular skill set, Sarah replied, and her voice carried implications that made Sterling's skin crawl. Think about it. My cover has been intact for 3 years. No problems, no close calls, no suspicious activity. Then suddenly, routine business communications that have never triggered any flags before just happened to catch the attention of intelligence analysts. Sterling felt the pieces clicking into place in his mind, forming a picture he didn't want to see. And I just happened to get arrested by military police instead of FBI agents? Sarah continued. And I just happened to end up in a facility where my tattoos would eventually be discovered by someone with the clearance to understand what they mean? You're suggesting this was orchestrated, Sterling said. I'm suggesting that someone needs a ghost operative for something so dangerous that they're willing to risk exposing one of the most classified soldiers in American military history. Sterling looked at the woman sitting calmly on the metal bench. 4 hours ago, she'd been a simple corporate security manager with a spotless record and a quiet life. Now he realized he was looking at a living weapon who'd been carefully hidden in plain sight, and someone had just activated her for a mission that officially couldn't exist. What did you do in Task Force Viper? Sterling asked. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her eyes distant as if she was remembering things she tried to forget. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Things that ensure certain people sleep peacefully at night, Colonel. Things that prevent much larger conflicts from ever beginning. Things that some very powerful individuals would prefer stayed buried forever. And Operation Lightning Strike? Sarah's expression darkened. Lightning Strike was supposed to be my last mission. The one that would buy me this quiet life in exchange for my silence about everything that came before. Sterling felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. But someone just ended your quiet life. Which means, Sarah said, standing up and walking to the small window that looked out over the military base, that either the people who arranged my retirement are dead, or something has happened that makes my continued silence less important than my continued usefulness. She turned back to Sterling, and he saw something in her eyes that made him take an involuntary step backward. It was the look of a predator who just realized she was being hunted, and had decided to hunt back. So the question, Colonel, isn't whether I'm a victim or a suspect. The question is whether I'm being recruited for a new mission, or whether someone just made the mistake of pulling a sleeping tiger out of her cage. Sterling stared at the woman who, 5 hours ago, had been arranging her desk calendar and responding to routine security emails. Now she was talking about ghost operations and buried secrets with the casual confidence of someone who'd lived in the shadows of national security for years. And the most terrifying part was that Sterling believed every word she was saying. What do you think is happening? He asked. Sarah smiled, and it was the coldest expression Sterling had ever seen on a human face. I think someone just made a very serious mistake, Colonel. And I think it's time for Sarah Martinez, corporate security manager, to take an extended vacation. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. The woman standing in front of Sterling still looked like the same person who'd been arrested that afternoon, but everything about her presence had changed. Her posture was different, more alert, more dangerous. Her voice carried new authority. Her eyes held depths that suggested capabilities Sterling didn't want to think about. Sarah Martinez, the office worker, was gone. Whoever had taken her place was something else entirely. And Sterling had the uncomfortable feeling that he was about to find out exactly what that something was.